morning, everybody. Welcome to the CalRecycle July monthly public meeting. Everybody ready? Cool. Before we start the agenda today, does anyone have any comments or anything that is not on their printed agenda for today? Hold on a second, Leonard.
Good morning. Leonard Lang, recyclingandregulation.com. This month, or last month's meeting video was posted to YouTube, and I strongly agree with doing that. Will this be done in the future? And will you post any past videos, or do you mind? I have some of the past videos I'd like to post. Would that be okay? We had a budget bill pass, and that's giving out a subsidy. We've got some information on that today. I do agree with subsidizing, at least for a short period of time, all recyclers who are struggling, and that's what this bill is doing. So I do agree with that, but we really need to restructure the processing payment mechanism because it hasn't changed since the beginning. And the processing payment must be adjusted to recognize that aluminum volume has dropped enormously since the beginning of the program. And this was in a budget bill. There were other CRV bills in the legislature this year, but in June, the Berkeley Convenience Report was released almost a year after it had been created. And there were things in there that I agreed with that I would have hoped the legislature would have had a chance to agree with, in that high-cost convenience zones should be allowed to just close and not be supported because of their high costs. And it did recommend increasing exemptions for the grocers, which I would also agree with. So what took so long to get that report out? I think this is information that people in this program needed. Under prepayment controls, I received a response from the department, thank you, that it would be taken up this year, but the rulemaking calendar said it was going to start in February, and what's taking so long? Pertaining to another budget bill in 2013, there were 2 emergency regulations adopted, training and load limits. And we still operate under emergency regulations for those regulations. When will they be adopted permanently? There's some bad things in what the department adopted, and those could be corrected if the industry were allowed to comment. I understand that the status of the ISRI lawsuit has moved on. I'd like an update on what that status is. I did speak off record last month about a hearing. That the decision for that informal hearing took over 3 months. And by law, they're supposed to be 10 working days. So what took so long? What on that one? In this case, a recycler may have been paying rent and hoping to get back in business, and all that money would have been wasted, all their expenses. Now, I spoke with the branch chief of ops this week, and he reiterated something that he'd said in the past. There's no perfect inspection, and that the CRV rate compensates for that. So my question is, why does enforcement continuously enforce perfect inspections when they know there's not any such thing, and they do it with de minimis amounts? It is a waste of effort. This goes back to what was put in the auditor's report on the cost of enforcement. This is a waste. It's not good management. And last month, Susan Collins asked about the quarterly report, and I understand it's still not out. So what's taking so long with that? I thank you.
So there's a list of items here. I'm not sure we're going to respond to all of them personally, but I think there's a couple that maybe we can respond to. I think, Elliot, if you're able to give an update on the ISRI lawsuit and talk about, if you can, if you have any information about the administrative hearing that he's referring to. And then Adam, if you want to maybe briefly give a response on the convenience study, and maybe the rest of these, Mr. Lang, if you can reduce them to a writing, we will, as usual, do our best to give you a written response.
I can also just address the YouTube video one. We'll do that quick. We started posting videos on YouTube because YouTube has some easier capabilities for closed captioning for web accessibility. I think you asked about whether you could post videos to our channel. I think the answer to that is no. We need to be in control of that. But that's why they're going up on YouTube. And they're linked from our website. As far as the ISRI lawsuit goes, there was a hearing last week. There is actually no final order because that's still being determined by the judge, but the judge is going to issue a preliminary injunction to not require members of ISRI who do not handle solid waste will not be required to comply with the 901 regs until there's some further work on that case. That order is not final yet. There's still some back and forth on exactly how that mechanically can be determined who is or isn't handling solid waste, because some ISRI members do in fact handle solid waste and have registered. And then in terms of the administrative hearing, I can't tell you why it took 3 months, but I can tell you that the reason that it would have been allowed to be that long for a hearing is because the parties would have waived time. So you would need to talk to the parties about why they were agreeable to that. But we can't do that as a matter of course.
In terms of the convenience study, there were some editorial issues with the convenience study that caused the review process to kind of linger, as it were. And in the end, we received a Public Records Act request, and were compelled to release it, warts and all, with all the typos and misstatements that were in it. We're still hoping to issue a revised version of that at some point with the various corrections, but the basic substance of it won't have changed.
Thanks. I didn't notice if there were any other hands that came up. Okay, sure. Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Collins from the Container Recycling Institute, and I wasn't planning to speak, but since the subject of the Berkeley study came up, we have not prepared our comments on that report, but we are planning to send in our thoughts on that report. The biggest one that is a mystery to me is the number of redemption centers that was used to do all of the modeling, and I had a number of questions throughout the report. That's why I haven't prepared the comments yet, because they're sort of complicated. For any data modeling process, if your data inputs are incorrect, then your modeling will also lead to incorrect results. And it wasn't clear to me in the study how many redemption centers were considered as the whole universe of redemption centers that existed at the time. I remember reading in the study something like 900 or 1,000, when we know that there were many hundreds more sites existing at the time that they did the study. And of course, that number has been in flux over time, declining over the last few years, to the point where there's probably around 1,400 or maybe even 1,500 now, but it seemed like the latest thing I saw from CalRecycle started in the 1,400s. So there's no way that there would have been 900 or 1,000 at the time that the study was done. No other CalRecycle document refers to that. So it makes the whole study very perplexing when the key variable that was being studied was off by such a huge percentage. And there were other variables that I saw in the study also that left me scratching my head. So I wanted to mention those things right now, since it sounds like maybe you're in the process of going through revisions. It would make a lot of sense to at least clarify what the universe of redemption centers was that was being examined, and explain if there are big differences between other public CalRecycle reports on the number of redemption centers. It would make sense to explain why there's a big difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Adam, you're up on the agenda. You want to roll into the agenda? Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. We're going to get started on the agenda here. The first up, we're going to have a report from our certification and registration branch, quarterly report on some metrics and key data. So we've got Flory Matsueda, the acting manager of the branch. Oh, there's a button.
Thank you.
Hidden button.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Adam, for the introduction. And I'll just go ahead and start the presentation. So this is for the second quarter, means April 1st through June 30th. I'm not going to read the numbers column by column, but it's just a comparison from last year to this year on June 30th, which is a snapshot. On that day, this is the percentage of statewide served, exempt, hold, and unserved percentage. Unfortunately, as you can see, the unserved percentage continued to increase, and that is in direct relation to recycling centers closing down. When the recycling center closed down, the beverage dealers in the convenience zone becomes responsible to redeem in-store, so the consumers will continue to have redemption opportunities, and that is called option A. And if they choose not to do so, there's option B, which is to pay the department $100 per day fee. And so again, this is side-by-side comparison from a year ago to currently. So right now there are over 4,000 beverage dealers redeeming in-store. Close to 4,000 dealers redeeming in-store, and there's some option B dealers as well. And for those non-responsive ones, if they do not return their affidavit choosing option A, then they're defaulting to option B. Handling fee total decreased a little bit, again, due to recycling center closures. Beverage manufacturers and distributor registrations has declined. This is unfortunately like a snapshot, like a significant decrease, but this is pretty influx because overall yearly numbers don't decrease that much, and during the time when we do not have as high number products or application to review, the staff continue to work on lists that we receive from Board of Equalization and other outreach efforts to continue to bring in more unregistered beverage manufacturers and distributors. As you can see, this is the number of beverage manufacturers and distributors account managed. From last year to this year, even though the number of registrations seems to be decreased, but overall we have over 300 new accounts that we're currently managing. And for disbursement programs, we have 182 new or renewed applications processed, and people taking the training pre-cert classes is 156, and this is a 3-year comparison on the board. Any questions and comments before I move on to the next presentation? Yes.
Good morning, Jeff Donlevy from Ming's Resources down in Hayward. You mentioned 182 new or renewed. How many new recycling centers actually opened in the last year?
Yeah, I received your written questions. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to compile the numbers, so I have to get back to you on that, along with your other questions regarding. I think you asked more questions about dealers and handling fee or convenience zone. I quickly looked at it, but I didn't have a chance to address it since I just got it last night. But we'll have to get back to you.
Okay, and some of the questions that I asked specifically for the Bay Area with very few recycling opportunities, and then seeing your slide that indicates all the retailers are taking them back. Is that really the case? Because the number of recycling centers in the Bay Area, I think, might be under 30. And I'm guessing the population for the Bay Area is close to 6 million.
Yeah, I cannot really tell you if they're really taking in bottles and cans in their store, because once they send in affidavits, they basically said they would. And our enforcement, I don't think they usually go out there due to workload and resources priorities. But when we receive any complaints, we'll definitely make an effort to go out. But this responsibility is pretty much, once they send in their affidavits, they are telling us they are going to do that. So I'm hoping that that's the case. You know, recycling takes everybody's efforts. So when the dealer, the owners acknowledge that's their responsibilities, I sure hope they make an effort to do that. Again, that's the law. So, and enforcement side will do the best that we can.
I'll jump in here for a second on that as well. So we simply don't have the resources to go and do test sales at every dealer who's an option A in the state. There's far too many for us to visit. So the strategy that we use is on a complaint basis, we visit them to determine whether or not they're in compliance. And I think we have some statistics on that. I don't have that at the tip of my fingers, but we can give you some more data on that if you'd like, in terms of how many have been inspected and what the results of that were. We do tend to find that when there is a complaint, it's a valid complaint, but we don't get, in the overall numbers, we don't get very many complaints.
Okay, that was excuse me, another one of the questions was, do you track the number of fines that you're getting from the retail? So it sounds like the industry needs to be a little more proactive on the complaints, because if you're finding that the complaints are valid, the store should be fined, which would probably get the retail association to be a little more active in complying with the law.
We do follow up on that. We have a process that we use with incremental penalty system, and we do collect the fines, but again, like I said, I don't have those numbers at the tip of my fingers.
Okay. And just to support what Mr. Lang had mentioned, as far as no perfect inspections, somebody replied to one of my requests, and it showed that enforcement activity for recycling centers is up in the total number of enforcement actions and the fines. And I think a lot of those are very small, unintentional infractions. And one of the things I think I'll want to work with staff on is on the enforcement, if somebody is missing a label on a bottle and it's unintentional, working on something other than the $100 and the progressive fines for the recycling centers, because it gets pretty demeaning, and it just makes more people not want to be in the recycling business.
Thanks.
I too wanted to comment on the presentation of the option A and option B stores.
Susan, we know who you are, but there are folks listening. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, thank you.
Sure. I'm Susan Collins from Container Recycling Institute. The presentation of the information can be misleading given the state of affairs with so many stores not complying. I don't remember Consumer Watchdog's results, but they went to X number of stores and found, I can't remember if it was a third or a half or whatever, that weren't in compliance, and they have video evidence of that happening. So the option A stores, as it's presented in the presentation, isn't presenting the full picture of what's really happening at the stores on the ground. And similarly with the option B stores, the dollar amounts never add up to the total number of stores. If you took that total number of stores that's there and multiplied it by $100 a day times 365 days, you would have millions more being received in that line item in your financial statements than what shows. So there's a lot of non-compliance both on the option A and the option B side. And I think last month at the monthly meeting, I asked if the option A stores were posted on the website for consumers. And I want to add to that because I don't know the answer to that yet. I don't know if they're up there yet. And if consumers if there's clear guidance for both how to return your containers to an option A store and how to complain to CalRecycle if you're not treated properly when you go to return those containers, so that you know who to follow up with. And I would add one more thing. In the case of the Consumer Watchdog survey that they did of different stores, that gives you a very clear list of who you can follow up with, because they were very clear about which stores didn't comply with returning the deposit to their customers. So that seems like a good place to start in doing inspections and follow-up. Thank you.
So in terms of the option A list, we don't have that published. I cannot say at this time when or if we will be publishing that. In terms of following up on leads, we are taking a look at the Consumer Watchdog report and checking up on those. Trying to remember all of the points you just made. What's that? Instructions. Oh, instructions, yeah. So in terms of instructions to the consumers, we've been trying to figure out what that would look like, because essentially the instruction is take your containers to a dealer that redeems and ask them for redemption. And if they don't, call us. I don't see that there's much more than we could.
I mean, that's the same instructions we would give someone taken to a recycling center. If you take them to a recycling center and they're not redeeming, you should call us as well, right? Or if they're only redeeming some, or if there's any issues, right? I mean, we could look at that. That's something.
If you have suggestions on what that would look like or what that should be, I'd be interested to see those. Okay.
One of my suggestions would be to put the list of option A stores up on the website. Mm-hmm. If I'm a consumer and there's not a redemption center in near proximity, and I go to your website and it doesn't say, oh, this is the other way you can redeem your containers, then I'm lost, right? It makes a lot of sense to just say, this is, way number one is find a redemption center. There's a way to do that on your website. And option number two for consumers is take it back to one of these stores.
Right. Thank you. So if there are no other questions on that, I'm going to invite Flory to move on to the next part of the presentation, which is relevant to this discussion we've just been having.
Okay. So Okay, so the next presentation I'm going to present is what happens when the only recycling center in the convenience zone closes. Before I go ahead and tell you what happens, I want to go through a few terms that we use currently. Served zone, as you can see on the board, is currently served by at least one recycling center within the convenience zone. Exempt zone is not currently served by a recycling center within the convenience zone, but exempt from having to redeem in-store or pay the daily fee to the fund. And unserved zone is not currently served by a recycling center within the convenience zone. And lastly is the hold zone. Hold is not currently served by a recycling center within the zone, but currently under review to determine if it'll be exempt or unserved. So hold zone is like in between. Hold status is generated when the only recycling center is no longer in the zone or operation in the zone, or the zone is newly activated, like a new supermarket just start in business. So that's hold zone. So those are the 4 terms about zones that we currently use.
Flory, I'm going to jump in for just 1 second.
Sure.
I assume that everybody out there in the audience and in webland already knows what a convenience zone is, but just for brief discussion, just to make sure, convenience zone is the half-mile radius around a supermarket as defined in the statute. And there's a requirement that every convenience zone have a recycling center in it, or if it doesn't, then they either need to be exempted or the dealers have to redeem or pay.
Thank you, Adam. All right, so move on to the next one. So the unserved convenience zone timeline, the dotted greens are kind of the steps. So if we follow along that, a convenience zone becomes a hold zone when it's a newly activated zone or the only recycling center serving the zone is no longer active, like I mentioned earlier. And that triggers an exemption review process, which I'm not going to elaborate here. The process we currently do is totally follow the law that's if you see the asterisk there, it's section 14571.8, so you can look it up, and that's kind of outside of my slides presentation right now. So, and then move on to the next. The hold zone goes through the exemption review process, and the review process will determine if the zone is either exemption granted, exemption denied, or exemption revoked, which means previously the zone was exempt, but now because the recycling area is closed, now the exemption is no longer valid for impacted zones. And then once the determination is made, stores that include supermarkets and beverage dealers will be sent letters advising them of the process determination. And if the determination is denied or revoked of the exemption, the supermarket and all the beverage dealers in that zone now become unserved. So there is a time gap between the recycling center is closed to their officially unserved. And the stores are not required to redeem or pay the fee yet at this point. Okay. So the newly unserved supermarkets and beverage dealers in the zone begin receiving a series of notices over a 30-day period, advising them there's no recycling center in their zone. And the first of the 3 notices is sent in the middle of the month, which is just coincide with our operation, how Doris works. And when there's asterisks, you can see the bottom where the act is for this part that we're following. So our operation is based upon what's in the act. And then after the 30 days of the first one is mailed, the second notice will be mailed. And then another 30-day pass after the second notice, the final notice will be sent along with an affidavit for the store to let us know if they're gonna choose option A or option B, and that is sent certified mail. And that completes a 60-day notice series. And at that time, the store is required, and we made it very clear to them in the letter that they're required to return an affidavit agreeing to redeem empty CRV beverage containers in store, which option A, or they will be billed for $100 per day fee, which is option B. If the store chooses to be silent and ignore our notices, then they will also be billed $100 a day option B fee, which is also based upon the act. So that concludes my short and brief presentation for what happens when a zone becomes unserved. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Flory. Next, we're going to be having a presentation on from our enforcement branch, and so I'm going to invite our acting enforcement branch chief, Alicia Davenport, up to prevent some fraud and present some information.
Good morning. On behalf of the Enforcement Branch, I will be providing information on the enforcement efforts related to the Beverage Container Recycling Fund. The figures provided are for January through March of 2019, and that is specifically for slides 1 and 2. The remaining slides are the time frame of April through June of 2019, and those slides belong to our interagency partners at Department of Justice. For the investigation section, there were no recommendations to terminate certifications in the period of the January through March of 2019 when it was compared to the previous year, the same quarter. There were actually 3 recommendations to deny certification applications for the same period, January through March of 2019, when compared to the previous year of 2019 for the same quarter. As far as the imported material report slide, we had a decrease of 786 imported material reports that were reported in calendar year 2018 for the same quarter, January through March, when compared to the 769 imported material reports received through January through March of 2019, which equates to about a 2% decrease in IMRs. The next slides will be for the Department of Justice, our interagency partners who handle the criminal investigations as it pertains to the Beverage Container Recycling Fund. In the first slide with the pictures, you will see an arrest that was done of an individual importing empty beverage containers. This arrest was from an individual importing material from Phoenix, Arizona into California with the intent to redeem for CRV. There was 6 individuals that was arrested in this arrest. There was a 53 tractor trailer, I should say 53-footer tractor trailer that was also impounded. And there was 8,328 pounds of aluminum and PET that was also seized at the time of the arrest. That equates to about a little over 12,000 in CRV that would have been the harm to the fund. They also seized about $3,691 in cash at that arrest. And the likelihood would be that this arrest and these individuals may have contributed to about $2.5 million in harm to the fund. The charges included recycling fraud, attempted grand theft, and conspiracy. The second arrest, also in April, just as the one before, was an individual that was arrested, again, importing from Phoenix, Arizona into California. It was also a 53-footer tractor trailer, that was also impounded, and 7,145 pounds of aluminum and PET was also seized at this arrest, equating to about $9,822 in 95 cents, that would have been a harm to the fund. The charges, again, similar to the previous slide, which is recycling fraud, conspiracy, attempted grand theft. The last slide is the third arrest that occurred. And this one was an interdiction, mobile interdiction in Needles, California. And that one resulted in 2 53-footer tractor trailers being seized, 2 26-footer box trucks, and 1 truck with a toy hauler were all impounded. There was a total of 26,148 pounds of aluminum and PET that was seized, with a CRV value of about $40,000, a little over $40,000 in CRV. That would have been a harm to the fund. The actual arrest was 7 individuals. Please note that although there was 5 vehicles, 2 vehicles had 2 individuals in those vehicles, and those individuals were also arrested. Again, the charges are the same: recycling, fraud, conspiracy, and also grand theft. Any questions or comments?
Leonard Lang. I'm glad to see that there were no decertifications in the first quarter. Second issue, 3 recommendations to deny certification. I consider myself an authority on the regulations, and the certification regulations don't require nor do they permit enforcement to judge on these applications. And from my experience, there is profiling done from Facebook pages, who's friends on Facebook pages and whatnot. So what is your authority to make these judgments on certification applications?
Thank you for the question. I will defer to Adam on this one.
Thanks, Alicia. Leonard, the department has broad authority to review applications and review the conduct and operations of recycling centers. I think that it defies logic to think that we would need to have special permission, regulations, or specific statutory authority to say that one of the branches charged with enforcement is not allowed to make recommendations regarding the certificate of an operator.
But based on what past experience? And if you're looking at Facebook pages, and trust me, I've already been in hearings. Your witnesses have testified to looking for these associations, which is guilt by association, and I object to the department's actions.
Noted.
Okay. Is it the department's policy now to go after those importers instead of going after the recyclers who purchase, who would have no knowledge that this material had been imported?
So just to answer your question, are we talking about our interagency partners at Department of Justice or the administrative side with CalRecycle?
CalRecycle.
So for CalRecycle, I'm not sure exactly what the answer you're looking for, but as far as reviewing the complaints that are received by the agency, we do that. We follow up and we do risk analysis on the information that's gathered. And then resulting of all the facts combined together, we do follow up on that information, and whether it does tie us to a certain recycling center, processor, or program participant, then we follow up in that manner.
Well, in the past, you've had knowledge of these importers and never put out any information to the recyclers who they were. And then you go after the recycler for something that they don't know about and that they're following the law. They're basing their purchase on inspection.
Leonard, if you have specific cases that you would like to discuss, put them in writing and submit them to us. We are not going to, in general terms, go over our detailed enforcement policies with you in this forum.
Thank you. We'll start with USA Recycling.
Thank you. Hello, Jenna Abbott from Protect CRV. I'm really happy to see the enforcement being done on the people who are perpetrating fraud. That's something that our recycling center members are concerned about, so it's nice to see that. And the large fines and so on and the harm to the fund, that's definitely something that we're interested in seeing stop. Earlier you mentioned that one of the things that was stopping you from taking enforcement against grocers that are not following their obligation to redeem containers was that you don't have the staff to do that, and I understand that. Everybody's stretched pretty thin. I think this comes down to a matter of ROI, and I'm sure you have all run the numbers to see what the potential for the fines are from the grocers as opposed to small independent recyclers. And I think we can all agree that the independent recyclers are under an extreme amount of pressure right now just trying to stay open. So if I might make a suggestion, I do like what Mrs. Collins said about putting a list of the stores that will accept redemption in store on your website. I think that would be super helpful to consumers. But I'd also love it if you haven't already, if you would spend some time figuring out what kind of potential impact to the fund there would be if you enforced with the grocers and maybe gave the recyclers who are under extreme pressure a little bit of relief when it comes to enforcement, because they're definitely feeling it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, we'll bring up Mike Miller from our operations branch.
Without my scooter.
That's right. Mike's foot's doing a lot better for those of you who are interested.
Nobody's interested, huh?
He's no longer rolling around. He's all set to kick the can,
Yeah, but
not the bucket.
but not the bucket. But unbelievably, I have to have the other foot done, so come back in January. I'll be on the scooter again. So I'm going to have, I have one item that's not on the agenda today. I want to invite everybody this afternoon in this room. We're doing an RFR workshop, Reasonable Financial Return Workshop. The department is going to initiate some rulemaking on the reasonable financial return. And we're having basically an informal workshop to solicit feedback and make a presentation to industry on a reasonable financial return. 1 o'clock back in here. So that's my plug. So let's go with the first one. We're going to do my updates on the operations. Oh, the other one. We'll do that one next. That's the fun one. If it's not there? It's not there, huh? Okay, well then do the 5 million one. So our normal operations, we go out and we do survey to create the rates. We'll publish it later. It's just a bunch of numbers. The only thing that's of note for my normal operational stuff is we have a certain operator in the state of California that is shutting down reverse vending machines, and the department has a reverse vending machine rate, and they're shutting them down quickly, so we're beginning to lose our universe in terms of being able to sample to create that rate. I've had some comments from people of what's going to happen if the RVMs start shutting down. We'll decide that when we actually get to the point of not having enough RVMs to actually create a rate for. So that's the only thing of note that happened last quarter, is the RVMs are shutting down. So now we can go on to this one, which I think people are interested in. And where's Jeff? Jeff Dunleavy. Okay, I'm going to answer your questions at the end. Some of it is covered in the presentation, but I will go through. I have answers for all of your questions you submitted. So the Budget Conference Committee approved some language in the budget that said the department may expend up to $5 million so that we can pay a low-volume $1,000 supplemental payment to recycling centers. And this presentation is going to go through and basically explain how we're going to do that, and then I'll answer questions at the end if we actually have any questions. So what is this thing? It's basically we're going to give $1,000 to the lowest volume recycling centers for each month. It starts July 1st of this year and goes through June 30th of next year. We're going to basically take the $5 million, divide it by 12, and that ends up actually with a mathematical number of 416.66 recycling centers. And since we have partial recycling centers, we rounded it off to 416 recycling centers. We're going to pay each month a just flat $1,000 payment. The calculation is at the bottom. It actually turns out to be $4,992,000 and 416 recycling centers. How are we going to determine who's eligible? So what we're going to do is each recycling center submits a shipping report through Doris, and we are going to evaluate all of those shipping reports that have an end date, or receipts and log end dates, that fall within the 3-month period before the actual month that we're going to pay. So the example is, for this July's payment, which we're in, we're going to be looking at April through June. So any shipping report that has a receipt and log date that ends April, May, or June will be used to calculate whether or not they're eligible. We're going to do this on an average daily volume, which I'm going to explain a little bit later, so that we can take into account for all the weight differences between the different material types. So we're going to pay first with the very lowest average daily volume, and we're just going to work our way up until we get to 416. So each month, those volumes are going to vary, and we'll just continue on paying until we're done. Recycling centers that are not operational during the month are closed down before we determine the payment will not be eligible. I think that answers one of your questions, Jeff. If any of them are under enforcement action of any kind, they will not be eligible. So the payment schedule is like this. I don't know if you can actually see that, but for July, the way the law reads is that we will make the determination on the first day of the second month following the eligible month. So July will be September 1st, and then that's the schedule. It'll take us 5 minutes to run it, and then it has to go through the controller's office to go through the whole payment process there, which generally can take 2 weeks, but it might take up to 40 days before the payments actually come out. So Jeff Dunleavy submitted a bunch of questions, so I'll read them off and answer them, and then I'll take questions from the audience if there are any. Jeff asked, will the list of RCs receiving the additional 1,000 be made public? And he also put in a paren without disclosing the monthly volume. We are going to release that. So we'll be putting a list out of the lowest volume for each month, and we'll put it in alphabetical order. There will be no volumes associated with it, but people will kind of know if they're on the list or not. Can the department release the current list of the lowest RCs? We did do a test run as if May was the actual month, and I think it's in department review right now to be released. So we will put a list out of the lowest as if May was the actual reporting month. If an RC may be eligible for the $1,000 closes before the payment date, will they still receive it? And the answer is no, they will not. So let me give an example. September 1st is when we're going to determine is when we're going to determine who's eligible. If a recycling center closes down before September 1st, they will not be eligible for the payment. So anybody operating a recycling center, if you want your payment for July, you've got to be open past September 1st. That's what that means. If a new site opens after July 1st, 2019, is that site eligible for the $1,000? Or is the $1,000 supplemental payment only available for sites operational before July 1st, 2019? The way we're going to do it is newly operational sites that come in after July, if they meet the eligibility criteria, they will be eligible for the $1,000. So anybody opening up a new recycling center, you'll get the $1,000 as long as you're not under enforcement action, and as long as you haven't closed, and as long as you've been operational. So, Jeff, did I get them all answered? Okay. Now, are there any other questions from the audience? That's enough. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mike. With that, Division of Recycling's presentations are complete.
Thanks, Adam. Mr. Clark Williams?
Thanks, Scott. Clark Williams. I'm a branch chief in MLA over the statewide technical and local resources branch, filling in for Howard Levinson today. We have 3 action items and 5 info items. Robert Martinez, you want to go ahead and come on up? Our first item here is always one of interest, which is how we're proposing to allocate the greenhouse gas reduction funds that have been earmarked for the department through the fiscal year 1920 budget. So Robert, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Clark. Good morning, everybody. Staff is proposing to allocate funds to 2 previously existing grant programs, 2 new grant programs, and several other initiatives. First is the Organics Grant Program. This existing competitive grant program's purpose is to lower greenhouse gas emissions by expanding existing capacity or establishing new facilities in California to reduce the amount of California-generated green materials, food materials, and/or alternative daily cover being sent to landfills. The allocation amount is $16,112,754, and the Organics Grant Program Cycle 4 Criteria RFA will be presented at today's public meeting. Second is the Community Composting Grant. The Materials Management and Local Assistance Division, in conjunction with CalRecycle's Environmental Justice Program, will implement this new grant program to improve, expand, or create community composting sites in order to promote community-based solutions to reduce food and green waste, increase organic material diversion, and grow community-scale composting programs statewide. The intent is to build strong working relationships with established community groups in order to increase the capacity and sustainability of those groups, identify success factors for community composting programs, and provide models for effective and sustainable community compost operations. The allocation amount will be $1,250,000, and the tentative presentation date will be fall or winter of 2019. Next is the Pilot Reuse Grant Program. Staff is proposing the creation of a new Pilot Reuse Grant Program. CalRecycle conducted a workshop in November 2018 to solicit input on reuse concepts and criteria. Over the next several months, staff will be developing that criteria, including evaluating the wide range of potential the potential project types, possible eligible entities, issues related to verification of reuse, development of GHG reduction quantification methodologies, and determining eligible reuse activities. The allocation amount will be $2 million, and the tentative presentation date is spring or summer of 2020. Next is the Recycled Fiber, Plastic, and Glass Program. The purpose of this existing competitive grant program is to lower overall greenhouse gas emissions by expanding existing capacity or establishing new facilities in California that use California-generated post-consumer recycled fiber, for example, old corrugated cardboard, paperboard, or textiles, plastic or glass, in order to manufacture products. The allocation amount for this grant program is $16,100,000, and the tentative presentation date is fall of 2020. Next is the Save the Food campaign. The Save the Food campaign, developed by the Natural Resources Defense Council and advertising professionals with the nonprofit Ad Council, raises awareness to change consumer behaviors that lead to wasting food at home. With the help of the Ad Council, CalRecycle will be able to access outdoor and digital public service advertisements for a fraction of the cost of similar advertising. The allocation amount is $100,000 with a tentative kickoff date of summer or fall 2019. Next is the Waste Characterization Study, Edible Food Characterization. This is a comprehensive statewide study focused on gathering accurate representative data to measure edible food disposed of in California. The funds will allow for additional food waste generator industry groups that could not be included in the 2018 commercial generator-based edible food waste characterization study due to a combination of budget, technical, and logistical challenges. This study will help track progress toward establishing the baseline measurement set forth in Senate Bill 1383, and the allocation amount is $400,000. The tentative kickoff date will be fall of 2019. Next is the Waste Characterization Study, Organics Recycling Characterization. The allocated funds will be used to expand the 2020 commercial generator-based edible food waste characterization study by characterizing food waste placed in organic recycling bins and will help assess levels of physical contamination. The allocation amount is $400,000 with a tentative kickoff date of fall of 2019. Next is the Pacific Coast Collaborative Food Waste Reduction Project. This is a West Coast regional project with states of Oregon and Washington, British Columbia, and municipalities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Oakland, Portland, and Seattle, working with nonprofit organizations such as the World Wildlife Fund, ReFed, and Wrap Global to voluntarily reduce food waste at large retailers. This would help fund technical assistance to help these retailers reduce waste throughout the food supply chain. The member PCC jurisdictions have established a regional goal to cut food waste in half by 2030, and this effort will help support that commitment. The allocation amount is $500,000, and the tentative kickoff date is fall of 2019. The Compost Volatile Organic Compound VOC research. To comply with the requirements of Senate Bill 1383 and California's efforts to expand composting infrastructure, new composting facilities will require air permits from local air pollution control districts. These facilities would benefit from additional data supporting a more refined range of VOC emissions that accounts for common feedstock blends and composting technologies. The allocation amount is $200,000, and a tentative kickoff date is fall or winter of 2019. Finally, as allowed for in the state budget, $1,250,000 will be allocated towards administrative costs. This concludes my presentation. Are there any comments or questions?
Good morning, Nick Lapis with Californians Against Waste. I just wanted to commend you guys for taking on all these various initiatives. They're all things that we've discussed at length in various settings. And it's interesting that you guys have been taking the input from the public and actually listening to it, because a lot of the stuff was stuff that was raised 2-3 years ago by stakeholders. And it's all great stuff. Thank you for taking it on.
Chuck Helgett with Republic Services, and I want to compliment staff as well, and we've had a couple of conversations about a couple of issues that we wanted to raise. One is on the GGRF funding for organics projects. The overlap with AB 1594 coming into play in 2020, and the question of whether the timing for this material being diverted from ADC or from disposal would be tied to the point of time when the grant is actually in play, or could be tied to when the application is submitted. So I think you need to consider the timing of those projects and how 1594, the ADC legislation, might impact the projects. And secondly, the way that we understand the outline for the project right now, the ability to partner with a wastewater treatment project. If we're going to do pre-processing for public does pre-processing and we ship the material to a wastewater treatment facility, we would have to rely on the wastewater treatment facility to apply for the grant the way the language is set up right now. And while that may not be a bad thing in some situations, we think that the way the language is structured right now, it probably pushes it would limit the application for somebody that's trying to do a bifurcated project like we would be proposing, but doing the wastewater, the pre-processing and then shipping it to another facility owned by someone else and not vertically integrated into our system. And I think, at least in the short term, excess capacity at wastewater treatment plants is probably one of the areas where we can get the most early bang for the buck. And we wouldn't like to be precluded from offering that type of project for consideration.
Thanks for those comments, Chuck. The comments are really specific to our organics criteria, which is our next item. So if you're amenable, what I think would make sense is if we table those comments and come back to them after our criteria presentation, when everyone in the room collectively has a little bit more background on what's being proposed for those criteria. Thanks.
Good morning, Janaki Jagannath with UC Davis School of Law. I wanted to also commend everybody for some of these recommendations, especially related to the community composting program, and to mention that such a program provides an opportunity to see the Greenhouse Gas Reductions Fund utilized for its legislative intent to ensure that low-income communities of color have access to climate benefits of some of our state climate funds. And given SB 1383 as it is and the rural exemption, many low-income farm worker communities and unincorporated communities and areas that are served by community service areas, county service areas, and CSAs will not actually enjoy curbside organics collection, and so having a community composting program is something that could be really powerful for ensuring that the state attains its climate and environmental justice goals. So thanks to everybody for putting those recommendations together.
Appreciate those comments. I'll just add that that's one program in particular that staff are really excited about working on. For each of the programs that were discussed within the allocation item, we will be coming back at a public meeting with actual, if it's a grant program criteria, which we're going to propose to use to award projects via competitive process, or for some of the contract items, the scope of work. So there'll be additional opportunities for public input on these allocation items as we move forward.
Any other comments on that? I just wanted to add my thanks to all the stakeholders for continuing to provide us with really good ideas, and then just the really excellent staff work that's been going on here. You know, even these little $100,000, $200,000, $400,000, $1 million, $2 million programs, they take an exceptional amount of staff work and time to do right. And even if it's a small program, the standards of excellence don't change with respect to handling those public funds. So it's an immense amount of work every time we create a new program. So appreciate the suggestions that keep coming, and we will continue to do our best to integrate them into the program as staffing allows. So thank you.
All right, Robert, I really appreciate that presentation. I also want to acknowledge the significant support we get from Sarah and Israel and the rest of the budget staff in preparing these allocation items. So thank you a lot for that cooperation. Okay, Paulina, how about you come on up? So our next item, Robert just discussed our allocation to fund our organics projects for this upcoming fiscal year, and Paulina's going to walk through our proposed criteria.
Good morning. Thank you, Clark, for the introduction. As Clark mentioned, this item requests the approval of the eligibility, scoring criteria, and evaluation process for Cycle 4 of the Organics Grant Program. In Cycles 1 to 3, CalRecycle awarded a total of $63.6 million to 14 compost and 9 anaerobic digestion infrastructure projects. In addition, through our 2 other Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grant programs, CalRecycle has awarded $25.7 million to 11 projects through the Fiber, Plastic, and Glass Grant Program and $20.6 million to 68 projects through the Food Waste Prevention and Rescue Grant Program. In the previous item, staff requested an allocation of $16.1 million for Cycle 4 of the Organics Grant Program, which included funds from fiscal years 1819 and 1820. As in previous cycles, eligible projects are those that are located in California and result in permanent, annual, and measurable reductions in GHG emissions compared to the existing practice of landfilling of California-generated green or food materials, and increases in the quantity of California-generated green or food materials that are newly diverted from landfill, disposal, or alternative daily cover use and are composted or digested. While Cycle 4 has many similarities to our 3 previous cycles, staff is also proposing several changes for this cycle based on stakeholder feedback and also our lessons learned in administering the other cycles. Many of the proposed changes are also to address a number of priorities, including the need for more organics recycling facilities in California to meet the diversion goals of SB 1383, the short liquidation period for GGRF funds to be expended, and the need for shovel-ready projects. To summarize these changes, which are also documented in detail in the RFA, and it's also posted on our website, we propose the following. To ensure that CalRecycle's limited funding results in the maximum number of projects, we propose establishing one allocation for both compost and anaerobic digestion projects with a maximum award amount of $3 million. To ensure funding of a rural project, we propose the prioritization of a minimum of one rural project. In light of the short liquidation period for GGRF funds and the need for shovel-ready projects, staff recommends a more stringent permitting status requirement for projects. We propose that applicants must demonstrate adequate progress toward obtaining the required permits and must also complete CEQA within the first 3 months of the award date. In past cycles, CalRecycle has allowed preprocessors to be the lead applicant. However, given the difficulty of securing binding agreements in order to ensure that the preprocessed materials are indeed composted or digested in order to achieve the awarded GHG reductions, we propose requiring that preprocessing projects be vertically integrated with a compost or digestion facility, for example, as the same parent company, or that the compost or digestion facility be the lead applicant under which a preprocessor could be a participant. In order to level the playing field so that smaller local facilities are able to compete with larger regional facilities, staff recommends combining the tons and GHG categories. Related to this, staff proposes that the points remaining from the combination of these 2 categories be redistributed to the permits and the budget categories. To better evaluate the viability of projects and select projects with the greatest likelihood of success, staff proposes replacing the fiscal soundness category with an experience and viability category. To encourage applicants to work with communities to develop projects that consider the needs of the communities, staff proposes providing bonus points to applicants that have a community benefits agreement. The agreement shall include components such as a description of the communication between the facility and its neighbors, reduction of impacts such as litter and odors, and monitoring and complaint reporting protocols. Finally, given the logistical challenges that are associated with grant funds being passed from grantees to food rescue partners, staff recommends requiring that food rescue partnerships be funded by the applicant instead of using grant funds. Pending the director's decision, our tentative timeline is to post the notice of funds available and the application guidelines and instructions in late summer, with applications due in the fall and awards being released in early 2020. Finally, one last note, some stakeholders have contacted us regarding potential revisions to how we quantify the greenhouse gas emission reductions from grant-funded projects. The California Air Resources Board is charged with developing these GHG quantification methodologies, and they recently revised the organics quantification methodology that was used in our last cycle to incorporate project co-benefits. A draft of the updated calculator was released this morning, and it can be found on the ARB's website. Subsequent to this, ARB will also be holding a 2-week comment period, and comments can be sent to their email address at dgrfprogram@arb.ca.gov. That's all for this item. Thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it back to Clerk.
Thanks, Paulina, for that thorough presentation. One thing I'll note is that in past cycles of this grant program, we've been oversubscribed. As staff, we anticipate that'll be the same case again this year. It's likely we're only going to be able to fund 5 to 6 projects. There's going to be a number of meritorious projects that we're not able to fund given the allocation. We posted the criteria maybe around July 3rd in the hopes we give people opportunities to review the item, provide us comments and input. It's invaluable to us to move through the process. We have heard from a number of folks in this room and probably on the webcast as well with input on the proposed criteria, and we're really appreciative for the time everyone took to review the item, provide those thoughts to us. A couple of things we've heard from folks, as Chuck mentioned earlier, with concerns about the proposed changes to pre-processing. We've heard concerns about our proposal for bonus points for community benefit agreements. We've heard some requests for clarification about at what time will the department assess are the materials or feedstocks going to these projects newly diverted from either landfill disposal or ADC. We've also heard some expressed interest about to what extent can this program play a role in helping address materials generated from fuel reduction efforts in wildland urban interface zones. I think at this point in time, what might make sense is to open it up for questions and comments from the audience, and then we can respond to those as I come up with some more thoughts. Okay, so the first point on Chuck's comments with regards to 1594, what we're proposing to do is to clarify that we will assess new diversion either from landfill disposal or from ADC based on what the routine practice is at the time of application. We're certainly sensitive to the fact that no one has a crystal ball to completely predict the future, so we think approach that works for us and creates a level playing field for all stakeholders is it's based on what's happening at the time of the application submittal to the department. So that's what we're going to propose to clarify in our criteria, and I believe is consistent with this item. With regards to pre-processing, we certainly recognize the need that there's a lot of different solutions to meet our organics diversion goals. We have relatively limited funding, and the question becomes, where do we prioritize the investment of that limited funding? In the past, we have had some challenges with a requirement that a standalone pre-processing project have a binding agreement with an entity that's going to compost or digest those materials. Obviously, ensuring that the pre-processed materials are composted or digested is imperative to achieving the greenhouse gas reductions anticipated in the item. So our proposal is to require pre-processors to be vertically integrated. That may provide an opportunity for a lead applicant who includes a pre-processing element to their project if there are problems. Let's say the contamination levels are higher in the pre-processing material than anticipated. They may have a fuller suite of options to pursue to reduce that contamination, whether that's upstream education for consumers, adjustments to the pre-processing, adjustments in the compost or digestion operations to address those concerns. I'll also observe that based on our experience to date, there's a difference in costs between the 3 project types that we're proposing to have eligible. We have costs for pre-processing projects, standalone, that we've seen at less than $1 million if it's a relatively straightforward project, maybe a depackager to remove food from packaging materials, to much more expensive, a few $1 million and upwards, depending on the extent of additional material recovery facility type equipment that's needed for that pre-processing operation. For our modern compost facilities, obviously this is dependent on location and throughput, but we're seeing a larger investment needed, maybe $8 to $12 million for those projects. For our digestion projects, we're seeing a range of costs from $10 million for a smaller project, all the way up north of $50 million. For co-digestion and wastewater treatment plants, we're seeing a range of investments required from the order of $5 to $8 million all the way up to over $20 million. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to prioritize is where are these relatively scarce public sector dollars needed the most to achieve the infrastructure investment first. So that's kind of the basis for our recommendation to prioritize the composting and digestion projects, but still allow pre-processing when the lead applicant is the composter or digester. Maybe I'll just pause there and see if we have additional questions or comments in the room.
Thank you. Mark Filimano from Momentum. I just wanted to follow up a little bit more about the changes, potential changes to the pre-processing requirements. We had some concern that taking this approach is going to exclude a lot of good applications, particularly from smaller applicants who don't necessarily have the resources and don't necessarily want to submit as, say, a subrecipient to an AD facility. How set in stone at this point are your recommendations around pre-processing? Is there still flexibility to other potential solutions? And in particular, we wanted to better understand how public organizations who don't have private ownership would be subject to these rules, about, what is the exact language? I forget. Let's see here. Well, basically, it seemed like the rules you selected were for private companies. So I just wanted to kind of understand how they would apply to public agencies as well, applying.
So, Clark, I'll take the first if you want to take the second. So the recommendations, Mark, thank you for your questions. Our recommendations to me, staff are clear in their recommendations, so I don't expect their recommendations to change at this point. Your point, I think, is accurate and well taken, which is any change we make potentially restricts some group of applicants in some way, and that's what these eligibility criteria in the end have to do. We have to restrict the number of applicants and the type of applicants to have a successful program. Your concerns are heard. Republic's concerns are heard. I would suggest that nothing is forever in this program. This is our fourth cycle. We've had pre-processing in. It's not been our most successful element in terms of follow through, essentially. And so we have to limit the resources that we have to move this through. If there continues to be interest in this area, the door is open to continue the conversation. Hopefully, maybe we would like to see something change substantively on the ground in terms of development of these pre-processing facilities, or maybe some kind of development in sort of the strategy of the offtake agreements and how those are done, so that we have more confidence that we can go ahead and put that back in. But I'd say at this time, I'm inclined to accept the recommendation on that piece for this funding round.
Thanks, Scott.
And Mark, to the second question, yeah, I appreciated the input. Our intent is to have the same requirements applied to public sector entities with regard to pre-processing as private sector entities. And so we're taking a close look at that language and seeing if we need to provide additional clarity to make sure that's communicated to everyone.
Hi, my name is Dan Morash with California Safe Soil. We have a third technology, which is enzymatic digestion, to add to the others that you are focused on, being anaerobic digestion and composting. And we have a plant that we've been operating for 3 years just north of Sacramento. And in 3 hours, we produce from waste food, we produce fertilizer and animal feed. And have had good success getting traction in those end user markets. We recycle food from a major retailer, and they have a lot more stores, supermarket stores, that they would like to include in the program. And we could increase our capacity. The issue is that the supermarket is in compliance with AB 1826, and the material that doesn't come to us goes to a composter. And so as a result, it's not being diverted from landfill, it's being diverted from compost, and therefore freeing up capacity of those compost facilities to allow more generators to become in compliance with AB 1826. But we're really precluded from the program the way that the rules are drawn up now, because we can't certify directly that the material's being diverted from landfill. So we then spoke with a large generator who does send their food waste to landfill and said, well, if you can certify, we can apply. And they declined because they didn't want to admit in writing that they were out of compliance with AB 1826. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 for us to try to find a way to participate in the program for those reasons.
Thanks for those comments, Dan. I also want to acknowledge my appreciation for you hosting a number of us out at your facility. I heard a lot of good things in response to your operations out there from staff that have opportunity to attend. With regards to the newly diverted requirements from landfill disposal, that's been consistent with our cycle so far. I certainly recognize the point you're making, which is, to some extent, the more capacity we have for either digestion or composting, the more pull we can have of materials away from landfill disposal. At the same time, we are concerned if a project utilizes feedstocks that were previously composted, will that composter be able to secure additional feedstocks? So kind of that cause and effect relationship, there's some uncertainty about it. I would also say that the current approved quantification methodology for assessing greenhouse gas emission reductions, a large portion of that benefit is associated with the avoided emissions from disposing organics in landfill. Given the fact that ARB right now has their quantification methodology out for comment, I think it would make a lot of sense for you to review that and provide comments about your process that would hopefully allow that to be incorporated into the quantification methodology. If you can get a large generator of food waste on board that's currently landfilling their material or disposing it, you're certainly still eligible to apply. We recognize that it can be challenging to get those commitments from generators. If you did apply today and the quantification methodology is as it was released for comment, you would need during the process to submit a request for an alternative quantification methodology. Basically, you need to tell us, my process doesn't fit the existing methodology for digestion projects. I need an alternative method. So we have mechanisms in place by which you could still apply and compete. We certainly recognize the challenges of submitting a successful application, being awarded a grant through this project are significant.
Mark Filamano from Momentum again. I wondered if you could just speak a little bit more about the community agreement, the signed community agreement. In particular, what would give a community organization kind of standing to be a signature to that agreement with an applicant, and how we can do more than just kind of jump through the hoop of finding some local organization and signing an agreement, but actually what really are you looking for here with that agreement?
So I think it may make sense for us to have a sidebar conversation about this, but at a high level, what we're really looking for is to the applicant, have engaged the community that's going to be impacted potentially by the project, identify what their needs are, and come to an agreement for how is communication going to be maintained throughout the duration of the project, what community needs related to the project and those community needs are, and how they're proposing to be addressed. We've tried to summarize that at a high level in both the RFA and the criteria. But it sounds like you may have some more specific experiences in mind, and we probably benefit from a sidebar conversation to make sure we're fully appreciating those and setting up the program appropriately. Okay, I'll do one last scan for additional questions or comments. Okay. Seeing none, so Scott, that's to you for your action. All right. Emily, you want to come on up? Okay. The third action item from the Materials Management Local Assistance Division this month is the approval of the California Used Oil Recycling Fund 3-year spending plan. Take it away, Emily.
Hi, thanks, Clark. So CalRecycle's used oil program was established by the California Oil Recycling Enhancement Act in 1991, and it basically encourages the recycling of used oil in California through the establishment of a manufacturer fee and then a recycling oil incentive program. Since its establishment, it's become very successful. We've been very successful. We've created an infrastructure of recycling centers throughout the state and collect about 88% of the used oil available for recycling annually. As part of the statute, there are specific mandating funding priorities set out for the fund, which include $11 million set aside for the oil payment program, which is the core of our used oil payment program, of our used oil collection program. The oil payment program provides funding to local regional programs that are used for collection infrastructure support and public outreach. So the $11 million to fund OPP is mandated by statute unless the funds are unavailable, at which point the statute requires that half of the remaining funding balance goes to OPP. Our last spending plan was approved in 2016, and in that year, OPP funding was proposed to be reduced in fiscal year 2018-19 to preserve the fund levels. However, due to lower than anticipated expenses and an audit settlement that was also lower than anticipated, we were able to fund the full $11 million for that fiscal year. Our current spending plan is based on some conservative revenue estimates from last year's governor's budget, and does reflect also another funding level of less than $11 million for OPP in the next 3 years. However, I do want to note that this is based on last year's governor's budget, and since then we have some actual numbers on the revenue and expenses that have been updated, and staff is currently projecting that we will be able to provide the full $11 million to OPP for this fiscal year and for the next fiscal year. However, in fiscal year 21-22, we do expect to reduce the OPP funding levels to $9 million in order to preserve our oil fund levels. Consistent with the desire to maintain and preserve the oil fund, we are not proposing any new discretionary contracts or expenditures that would put any more of a draw on the fund. That concludes my presentation. Any questions?
All right, thanks, Emily. Appreciate your work on this, and Scott, that one's to you. I was not quite as smooth of this as Dr. Levinson was. I just want to just realize that I forgot to acknowledge all the staff who've worked so hard on our organics allocation item and organics criteria. A whole host of people involved in these efforts, and we couldn't do it without their work. So I just want to publicly acknowledge Paulina Kolick, Heather Williams, Kristen Pidcock, Emily Lusick, Victoria No, Robert Martinez, Stan Ueda, Melissa Sanford, Scott Beckner, Robert Horitz, Marissa Dakota, and Anthony Ballesteri for all their work on those programs. It's a real honor to get to work with that great team to see these items come forward. So thank you for that. Okay, so now we're going to transition into the information items from Materials Management Local Assistance. First up is awards for Household Hazardous Waste Grant Program with fiscal year 19-20 funding. These grants are provided to cities and counties or the local agencies with responsibility for solid waste management to implement programs to reduce household hazardous waste disposal. The grant funds can be used to expand household hazardous waste programs with respect to collection, public education, waste reduction, source reduction, reuse, recycling of household hazardous waste. As in past cycles, this program funds 2 different project areas, both construction projects and small projects. Small projects include items like educational programs, equipment purchases, and curbside collection. For construction projects, we'll be funding 2 applicants. And as for the small projects, this cycle was oversubscribed. We conducted a random selection drawing to determine the recommended funding order of eligible applicants. Applicants who did not receive an HHW small grant award during the last 3 fiscal years were given priority. Of the 25 applications we received, 15 will be fully funded and 1 will be partially funded. This item is delegated to Howard. He's already signed it. Thanks to Jill Hashida, Matt Fong, and Natalie Gandolfo for all their work on these grants. All right, moving along to information item D2, awards for our local conservation corp grant program from fiscal year 1920. The purpose of this program is to support the success of disadvantaged youth through grants established to certified community conservation corps to implement urban, rural, and litter abatement and recycling activities. The program accomplishes this through community recycling services and litter abatement projects that collect and divert recyclable materials from landfill disposal.